How's it going, Aaron? It's great to get you on the podcast. My life is a bit crazy right now, right? I have a second kid coming pretty soon here, and trying to like schedule everyone in, and you can see like I have a bunch of just like home repair, home project materials above me that I very conveniently forgot to take out of the frame today. But how's it going?
I'm fantastic, thank you. And congratulations on that wonderful news.
Yeah, yeah, thanks. It's fantastic. I'm really excited. I love being a dad. I love being a parent, and it's like the best thing in the world. If I could like quit everything and just do that 24/7, I totally would, right? Like only if my wife was like a lawyer or something like that.
Right, absolutely. Yeah, that's well, enemy.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. So, Aaron, why don't we start with your background, right? What made you want to get into IT? What made you want to go into, security overall, right? The reason why I start everyone there is because, I remember when I was trying to get into security, right? And all I really wanted to hear was that someone else had that same passion, that same interest as me, maybe even came from a similar background as me. And it helped me mentally when I finally, found that, right? To know like, oh, okay, if they did it, maybe it's possible for me. Right. So I always started someone off there because, there's probably someone listening that, is in that same situation, right?
Yeah, yeah. So, it's definitely an interesting one. So it started back when I was 15, nearly 16, so about 13, 12, 13 years ago now. Uh, so like any teenage boy, a lot of gaming, console gaming, PC gaming. Um, One of my accounts actually got compromised, and they took everything that I'd worked for. I was like, how could someone do this? Right? Like, how is this possible? And so I started kind of digging into that and found this entire like hacking space. Now, my uncle at the time did work, in cybersecurity more on the compliance side of things. So I knew a little bit, right? But not so much the actual technical hacking. And so I started digging around in forums. That kind of got me into like game hacking, console hacking, right? Like soldering consoles, like flashing them, selling custom firmware so I could like do all these crazy things. And the more I started to look on these forums, the more my kind of eyes opened to all these other areas, right? Like it's such a big, broad like industry. And that kind of brought me to the web application side of cybersecurity. And that really interested me because it was far more impactful than just hacking games, right? Like the game hacking stuff was fun, but when you think about like actual impact and real world impact, that really caught my attention and caught my eye. Started doing a ton of research every day. I'd be bringing in notes from the night before into school, like reading them throughout lunch, trying to learn and absorb all this information. And it was all like your typical like SQL inject and like all of that and wrapping my head around how all of that works. And really, I wanted to just apply that knowledge, right? That was the next thing because the only way to really solidify something as you're learning and naturally there's no way, or I thought at least at the time, there was no way of me doing that like legally, you know? I started doing a bit more research and asking questions on forums, and I discovered like, oh, there are actually organizations that you can hack and they won't sue you and throw you into prison, right? Through these vulnerability disclosure programs. And some of them might even pay you. So I thought, wait, hang on a second. I'm a teenage boy that can hack things and potentially get paid. Like that to me was the dream. And so I started doing that in my spare time quite a lot. And I went to university after school, did my computer science degree, didn't really touch on cybersecurity too much. And from there went into your kind of typical security engineer role at VMware. So things like threat modeling, we're doing internal like pen testing for applications that we were building. But in parallel with that, the entire time I was doing like bug bounty. So finding the same thing again, finding vulnerabilities in web applications and in authorized fashion and getting paid for it. And one of the things that became very apparent to me was I was spending quite a lot of time researching a single target that had built a single custom web application. And the issue with that is the payout was not always worth the investment of time because that knowledge is not transferable to another organization. It built everything using a different language, different infrastructure, has a whole different way of doing things. So that's how I found SaaS security. I had identified a way in, okay, if I find something that isn't necessarily a vulnerability, but a way to take advantage of a risky configuration made by a customer of Salesforce or ServiceNow. I'm talking about if we actually look at the more well-known examples of like public AWS buckets, it's exactly that kind of thing of like, that's just a repeatable method in which you can locate and exploit something and do it at scale. And so that's exactly what I wanted to apply to SaaS, because it was a very niche area. Not a lot of research had been done into SaaS. And that was just a goldmine for me. Really, both from a career perspective and at the time, figured it would be like a goldmine. So I released my first article, which was effectively a summary as to how one might exploit data exposure issues in Salesforce, the situations in which customers accidentally expose data to the public internet, and how one could defend against it, but also identify those risks. And that kind of blew up the internet a little bit, and it caught the attention of my current employer at Omni, which is like a SSPM tool used to assist organizations with locking down and securing their SaaS posture. So they reached out to me and said, hey, we saw this article. This is exactly the kind of thing that we're doing. And at that time, I was actually unemployed and looking for my next role. So I was like, yeah, sure. We'll do like a paid, like joint article to talk about it. So I jumped on a call and I was effectively ambushed because they were like, why don't you just join us? We'll hire you and just give you a job if you're looking for one. And it seems like you know what you're talking about. And so I was employee number, I think, 28 at the company and the founding member of the App Omni Labs security research function of the company. And as of current, I'm the chief of security research over there and leading up that function. That's really my background, how I fell into the space in the first place, really, and how it kind of developed into where I'm.
Yeah, that's fascinating, because hearing your story just brings to mind, right, that curiosity that you have to have, getting into security and, having like that thirst that you can like never quench, no matter how much research you do, no matter like how much, pen testing or vulnerabilities you find, you're like always kind of looking for that next thing. And that was like the number one thing when I was trying to get into security. I got my bachelor's degree in criminal justice, fully intended on going into federal law enforcement, being sent overseas, whatever it might be, right? And doing that whole thing for the rest of my life. I did IT literally in college. I was on the like help desk team in college just for like beer money. Like that was it, like, okay, this pays for my cell phone and my beer for the week, like
What more
that's
do you need?
right. Like, that's all I needed. But I hated everything about that, help desk job. I was like, man, this is stupid, and then right after college, I have these student loans. So it's like, okay, let's get into help desk. Let's, get some money coming in, right? Because it takes forever to get into any federal agency, right? And that's when I kind of discovered security. I never thought about it or anything like that, but someone introduced me to it and like I couldn't stop, I started getting into like wireless security and infrastructure security, vulnerability management, like that whole thing. I was so passionate about it. I mean, I probably should have been fired like 5 different times from this job, right? But I like forced my way into handling all the vulnerability management for this company that didn't have any like whatsoever, and I like had to sit down with these developers that had created this code from scratch that we had sold hundreds of times over and over and run through, my open source vulnerability scans and being like, hey guys, we have 1,500 high vulnerabilities. This is really bad. When I go to these federal agencies, and I'm on site, they're pen testing the app live in front of me. Like that can't happen. This isn't even allowed to run in their environment, and like just thinking back, it's like, man, I was so young and stupid. I'm still pretty stupid, but less stupid, you know? Like I was so stupid and young at the time that like, it was like, man, how did I even get through that? You know, but you start doing so much research because I was researching at work. I was researching at home.
Exactly.
I was sleeping and thinking about it, you know, like that's the kind of passion that you really need getting into security. One, because there's so much to learn, right? But two, because it's also so hard at times that, that you need that passion, you need that drive to be like, yeah, it's difficult, but I still want to do it, you know? And like, I'm a terrible hacker with web app security. I mean, it's like, man, whenever I go to a new company, it's like, I hope they have an AppSec guy because I don't want to touch that. I don't want to think about that. I don't want to install Burp Suite on my computer. Like, end of story. You know, I don't even want to think about it, right? Give me every other facet of security. AppSec is the one I don't want to do.
Well, everyone's got their niche, and it's funny. Like, it just reminds me, you saying that kind of that thirst for knowledge. Like, this is so bad, but I used to not let myself go to bed until I could recite everything I learned that single day. So
Wow.
I would pace around the dining room while my parents were asleep and basically just recite and ask myself questions about what I learned. You know, I don't want to make it seem like when I talk about my background, it was such a streamlined process because there's so much that I left out, right? There was so many areas that I tried um, within security and just couldn't take to. And that could be for various reasons. Maybe it was too difficult for me at the time. I couldn't wrap my head around it. I remember looking at like functional programming and thinking like, okay, I will never understand this.
Yeah.
And there were so many times where I did really kind of want to give up. Um, because I was just struggling to understand all these concepts. And it is a slow and steady wins the race. Like sometimes, yes, you can just pick something up and take to it naturally as if it's second nature. But other things, they do take time and effort. And really, like that saying of which like good things like take time, right? I've been doing this for so many years. And I think when people read my research or speak to me about it, they forget that. And they might think like, oh, you know so much about this. And I was like, well, I've been doing SaaS security now for like over 4 years, every single day in my spare time at work. And it's not like I'm some natural born genius. I'm really not. Like I'm a trial and effort guy. I fail many times before I succeed.
Yeah. You know, it's, there's something very true about, I think I heard, you know, maybe Elon Musk say this several years ago, right? Is the industry, I guess, agreement, right, on this is that you need to get 10,000 hours in to really feel like you're excelling in an area or being an, you know, I wouldn't even call it an expert, but, you know, to feel like you're competent in any, you know, principle or domain, whatever it might be, right? And so when you say you struggled, you know, for that many years, right, you got to think about, okay, well, I put in 100 hours this week of doing it at my day job, going home, doing it more, like staying up late. You know, you probably put in that time, right? And the key there is getting through those 10,000 hours as quickly as possible. Because if you can get those 10,000 hours in, you know, in a year when it takes other people 5 years, right? Because I think that's the actual like average 9 to 5 like time span, right? Like that's how long it takes. It takes like 5 years or something like that. I can't remember what it is because once I learned it, I went after it and I hit it and I forgot about it, right? But if you can do that in 1 year, you know, you factor in, it's like, okay, I'm actually at year 5 in my brain, you know, let's build off of this, you know, and maybe you dial things back a little bit, you know, so you have some like work-life balance and whatnot. But, you know, I remember when I was just getting started and I was in that help desk job and, I mean, I applied to somewhere between 300 and 500 different jobs, right? Every single day I was applying and interviewing and I was employed. I was fully employed at that time. I would literally go into our break room, take an interview, you know, get vomit, go right back to work like nothing ever happened. and figure stuff out, right? But it's that constant knocking, right? I got to the point where I was like, okay, well, surely not every company in the world will say no to me. I just got to find one that says yes, and that's like, that mentality is so helpful though, because you just got to break it down like that. I don't need everyone to say yes to me. I need one to say yes to me.
Exactly.
How many companies are there? Millions. Okay, well, I just got to find one.
Yeah, that's exactly it. It's really the perseverance. I think that's exactly the word to describe how to go from being a complete newbie in security, whatever domain that's in, to becoming an expert. And it is just perseverance.
Yeah. Yeah. That is, man, that is so critical. I remember when I was getting my master's degree in cybersecurity, and it was a very hands-on program, right? So we're not just talking about, theory all day. Like we're literally, hacking things and everything else like that, right? Like, one day we're learning about wireless security on, VPA and WEP and, why you would want to stay away from WEP, and you're doing an exploit to actually see why, right? And there was one project where they said, okay, find a vulnerability, exploit it on a device, and give me like a report on it, right? Didn't realize that it was basically a pen test report, that like that's what you're putting together. And so I chose, of course, something wireless, right? And so I didn't do very much with Bluetooth, but I knew Bluetooth was vulnerable to a lot of like basic things, of like, naming functions and stuff like that, right? So I figured, okay, let's challenge myself a little bit here. I was probably stupid on it. I procrastinate very well, right? So I'm, you know, 48 hours before I have to hand in this project.
Oh yeah. Yeah.
And, I'm starting to try and exploit this Bluetooth vulnerability on an iPhone. And, it took me, 24 hours. I mean, straight. Like I did not sleep. My now wife was like falling asleep, in my bed while I'm sitting at my desk, like working through this problem. And I gave up after 24 hours. I was like, all right, let's just go to Android. 24 might
Right.
have been, a little bit longer, right? But I go to Android, 20 minutes, I got root. And I'm just sitting here like, I'm a terrible hacker. I'm so bad at this. If I can get root on Android via a Bluetooth hack, that should never, like, you should never be able to get root on any device via anything Bluetooth. Like Bluetooth and root do not go together, in security. Like those two things should not be happening. If I'm so bad that I could get this on Android, like what is really going on here, right? But like that talks about that perseverance, where it's like it wasn't just the deadline that I had. It was like I was so frustrated that I couldn't get it to work on iPhone. I was so beyond mad that I just couldn't get this thing to work, that I had switched to another platform to figure out if it was like a platform architecture thing. And then,
Yeah.
sure enough, the next class I take is mobile security architecture, and we're talking about why basically that happened.
Yeah. It's funny you're talking about your wife there. Like I've been testing SaaS applications for like weeks on end with nothing, right? I'm gaining knowledge of the platform, but in terms of findings, it's like nothing. And for some reason, it always seems to be when I'm not supposed to be doing it that I find something. So
Yeah.
my girlfriend will literally be like, you need to go to bed. I'll be like, okay, just 5 minutes, I promise. I'm like, I'll go to bed. And with like 2 minutes to spare, I'll find something crazy. And I'm like, okay, well, hang on 10 more minutes because I think I just found something. And
Yeah.
then all of a sudden, 2 hours later, it's like a full exploit chain. I always think like that's, if I had gone to bed, like, I wouldn't have found that. It just always seems to be when I'm not supposed to actually be doing it, um, which is, which is funny. But once again, perseverance.
Talk to me about, what it's like pen testing a SaaS app. I would assume that it's probably a little bit different from pen testing a regular, application, right? That's maybe built on S3 or lives in S3 or something like that.
Yeah.
How is it different? Are you limited in the techniques that you can use, since it's technically, a SaaS app? It's like a service offering in a cloud.
Yeah. That's a great question. So I like to look at this, two facets, right? So there's the vulnerability side of things, generally what we've been talking about throughout this discussion, and that is like your 0 days. That is exploits in the SaaS application itself that only the vendor can fix. right? Like you're like a SQL injection in like the core platform and in the software itself. And then there is the misconfiguration side of things, in which there is no issue with the software. There's no inherent out of the box vulnerability or a 0 day at the fault of the vendor, but a customer of theirs has toyed around where they shouldn't with configuration and security controls, or lack of toying with them. And that's resulted in some kind of exposure, like a data exposure issue. Throughout my work, I mostly focus on that misconfiguration bucket. That often uncovers 0 days in the process, because I will see something that's a little janky and be like, oh, like how does this play with another feature? But the biggest thing that's really helped me um, kind of understand platforms, even from a security perspective, is just becoming almost like a platform administrator, like having the same knowledge as a platform administrator or a platform developer. A lot of these platforms allow for custom application development through like some framework that they have. So I'll get myself certified as a platform developer. I'll take the exam. I'll learn all about the features and how they interact with each other, or stand alone. I'll learn the flavor of JavaScript, whatever they're using on the platform as a certified developer. And that gives me a fantastic base to start off, because the mindset that I've always applied when it comes to web application hacking in general is looking at like how do these various features interact with each other in a way that is potentially insecure, and just having an understanding of the product. I'm not one of these hackers that's kind of like spray and pray. I like to really know what's going on under the hood wherever possible. I never really view a SaaS application from an attacker perspective initially. I view it from like a learner's, beginner's perspective of what does this even do? Like, what are people using it for? How can I implement this and that? I'll follow documentation. Sometimes there's none that's provided by the vendor. I'll use like Stack Overflow. I'll learn what common problems people are having, and just to get that general knowledge. And then from there, I can actually have that attacker perspective of like, okay, are there any areas that I've looked at that are having no security controls around them? Or are the security controls decentralized in a way that it managing them is potentially difficult? So I'm quite lucky working at Omni, because a couple of reasons. Number one, getting access to these applications is not always easy. ServiceNow and Salesforce, it's great because you've got like a free developer license. You can spin up an instance, your own personal instance, in like 2 minutes. But often that's not the case. And a license could be like 20K a month, right? So I have the luxury and the privilege of having access to things that a lot of other research is done. So that's one requirement. I always tell people, like, if you're like a bug bounty hunter or hacker, like, pool together with your friends, everyone throwing a little bit of money, like get yourself an instance if you want to find like a lot of cool new things. But also at Omni, I have the luxury of anything I find that I believe may be exploitable, like a misconfiguration, I can productize that. So I'll actually build a check or a scanflat in the product and see how many customers that it lights up. And that kind of brings me into really one of my most recent pieces of research, and that was part of it. I was able to productize what I found, and I was like, okay, this is actually a big issue. This is a seriously big problem. And that kind of validates my findings and allows me to then start educating our customers, educating the vendor, as to what's going on in their customer instances, and then educating the security community and just platform administrators in general with a public disclosure.
Yeah, there's a lot there, but I want to circle back a little bit, just so I personally remember it, right? I had Maybe I'm like a terrible podcast host. I take like no notes when we're talking. It's a conversation, right? But I want to circle back, right? Because you said something earlier where essentially you made this post, and App Omni reached out
Yeah.
and wanted to collaborate, right? And that's kind of how you got the current job. And I want to highlight the importance of that, right? Because the normal person, the normal workflow is saying, I don't have anything unique here. I don't have anything really cool here. I'm not providing that much value to others. Why would I make a blog post about it? Why would I make a podcast about it or, go anywhere and talk about it, right? Like I'm not doing, novel things, right? But you still, you know, thought that it was cool. You thought that it was interesting and you made that post about it with no intention of, hey, this is going to get me a job, at App Omni being a security researcher in this space that I love, right? And I want to highlight that because in security or really just in the world overall, right? I feel like you have to find ways to stand out. This podcast helps me stand out significantly, right? Like when I go into an interview or even a call internally at a company, right? Immediately people add some sort of value to what I'm saying just because I have a podcast, right? Not knowing like, hey, you could have a podcast too.
Right.
But it brings a level of authenticity and, it almost like qualifies you without qualifying you for these different things, which is really important because, and I bring it up too, because I know a couple people that are really struggling trying to find work right now. And they're great, security practitioners, but they're having trouble finding work. And I keep on telling them like, hey, go outside the box and do something like make a blog post, make a website, right? Like offer up different things. And it adds a lot of recognition to your brand without you having to do anything, and
Yeah.
that's a really important thing that a lot of people miss.
That's exactly it. And it's so funny because I made the blog post, as you said, one, because it was interesting. I thought I found something like net new and novel, and I did. But the SaaS security space wasn't like my target audience necessarily. I was writing it, well, firstly for anyone curious, but mainly for like red teamers, like the kind of de facto stereotypical people who would apply that methodology. And then also for organizations to protect themselves. So I really ended up in a space that I didn't even know existed. I didn't know SaaS security was a thing. I just saw this as like, misconfigurations being widely applied to SaaS instances. Here's how you exploit them. It's cool. It's novel. And I just fell into it. And I don't know where I would be if I hadn't made that blog post. I could be doing more standard like web application stuff, go back to the security engineering and the threat modeling. But yeah, it was nice about it. It was great validation that is an entire space that found value from what I did, and that's an entire space I didn't know existed. So that was really cool.
Yeah, it's fascinating what we do with like no intention, right? And then something good, comes from it. Like, that's a really interesting situation, right? It's kind of like your passion brought you to be the forefront of, at the Omni is it's a really important company, right? And I'll give you this example. I was recently, employed by one of the largest automotive manufacturers, in the world, right, for their financial services arm. My CISO got on a call, it was internal to security only, and he said, yeah, we have 3 core SaaS applications, and I had to stop him right there, right, because I was recently, literally like that week, looking at our SaaS apps and talking to the developers that are, working on these SaaS apps. And I said, no, that's wrong. We have 7 and we're going to 10 at the end of the year. And he was like, oh, what are they? And I had to like list them out, and he goes, I didn't even know that was a thing. Right. And like, how common is that though? I mean, that's extremely common. If you ask, any organization, right? If you took a poll across the globe and said, what applications do you have in your environment? How many SaaS? How many natively run on EC2 or S3 or, whatever that flavor is in Azure or GCP, maybe 1% would be able to tell you and actually answer that, And so you need a platform like App Omni that comes in, gets plugged in and pulls in that information because, as a security professional, not every company can have a team of 100, 200, 300 security professionals. I was at one company that had, I think, 250 people on the security team, right? It wasn't that big of a company overall. They were a global company, but they were like a credit bureau, right? So they had the funding. Like they would just write blank checks to these companies, and Splunk would be like, yeah, you're going to pay us, 2 million in a year. And my CISO's like, you should have doubled it, and writes the check for 2 million, like whatever it is, like he doesn't even care.
Yeah.
That's that environment. But everywhere else, I mean, I've been one of three, one of five. Now I'm one of one. Yes,
Yeah.
and so people need these powerful tools to even have a chance at like telling the developers, hey, you need to fix this exactly like right here. This is how you fix it. This is what's going on. And that's why, App Omni in particular, App Omni is not sponsoring this podcast or anything like that. But I've looked at the platform a lot. Like, unfortunately, maybe for myself, I've looked at the platform quite a lot. And so I know it pretty well. And it's like, okay, I need this thing, in house. I need to be working with this immediately.
Yeah, it's interesting because what you touched on at the beginning there, that sprawl is like
Yeah. Yeah.
everywhere. Every organization seems to have this problem. Like you will have a department with multiple teams, even in a small organization, and these teams may be doing very similar work, but they'll have preference for one SaaS to fulfill one function, and another team will use a different one to fulfill that same function. And you have this situation in which all of a sudden you're using hundreds, right? And you're granting different apps access to like God knows how much of your data, which is a massive problem. And if App Omni was simply just an inventory tool to surface what SaaS apps are being used across your organization, that alone would be so valuable. But it's
Yeah.
not even all of these other fantastic features. But it's absolutely crucial to understand, just get a grip on that inventory in the first place. Like, how can you secure something if you don't even know you're using it? And while that's not like the forefront of my research, it's the same underlying concept of like the unknown. In my opinion, the unknown is the biggest danger. Like unknown API endpoints that can be exploited or leveraged by threat actor, right? Like unknown SaaS apps you're using that you have no idea what data is being stored there, how it's being secured and used. Is it being used responsibly and appropriately from a security perspective? So yeah, it's definitely not new. What I'm hearing from you, every organization has it, and that's why we're seeing a lot more uptake and attention as well from organizations that are learning over time. Maybe hopefully as a result of my research and my blog posts, that this is an area to take seriously because your most sensitive data is most likely sitting one of your SaaS apps, and you may not even know it.
Yeah. Yeah, that's a really good point, actually. When I was at an employer, the automotive manufacturer, right? I was just talking to the Salesforce admin, right? And my CISO kind of pointed me in that direction because he's like, look, we don't really ever look at this. We need someone with that cloud mindset to go in there and just look at what's going on, right? Because we literally don't know. I'm talking to them, and it's interesting. I have a way of getting developers to tell me too much information or much more than what they should be telling me. Maybe I'm easy to talk to or something. But I was talking to him, and he said, "Oh yeah, like we store 100% of our customer data here, and this part of the database is sending info over here, and all this other stuff." Right. And I'm just sitting here and I asked him one question. I said, so if Salesforce ever got breached, what are we looking at? It was, oh no, that's everything. Yeah. I was like, you don't understand what a breach is because you don't know what I just asked, and it's, it's interesting because as security, we didn't even know that it was that high of a risk, right? We had some idea, like, yeah, there's some risk over there, but I think that we were so used to our risk being mitigated or accepted somewhere else in the business that we didn't realize, hey, we're using a pretty critical to our business application. It has a lot of our data. We need to focus more time and resources on this. And even, you know, like beyond that, right? Like our Salesforce environment was growing significantly and security didn't even know. We already had, I think it was 7 Salesforce clouds, like cloud instances, right? And then we migrated that down to 5 and then down to 3. And now it was going back up to 5, right?
Yeah.
But that's a lot of data. That's a lot of cloud presence, in a SaaS app that you probably didn't even realize was there. And there's, literally one guy at the company that knows, oh yeah, that's how it all works. That's what it is, right? Literally
If you're
one guy
lucky,
at the
if
company.
you're lucky, it's one. Um,
Yeah.
Often zero. It's often zero. And another thing that really I feel like contributes to it a lot in organizations like this problem is the misunderstanding of that shared responsibility model. It's like, oh no, Salesforce, like it's secure. Like they have their own like security teams, they're securing it. And it's like, okay, but they are not going to stop you from misconfiguring your access controls and just leaving everything wide open. Like that could be a business use case for you. They don't know. They don't care. It's not on their side of the shared responsibility model. And then secondly, it's like, who owns SaaS security in your organization? Like whose responsibility is it? Because you've got like your platform owners, right? Who aren't necessarily security minded individuals, far too much on their plate already, right? They're managing thousands potentially of users and processes and making sure that the instance is functioning, and implementing all of these workflows, etc. You then got like the security teams and they'll be like, well, we do pen tests on our own applications. Like this isn't our own application. Like, yes, we've purchased the product, but like it's not really falling into a role. Plus you know how it works. You're the platform owner. So like, why don't you deal with it? And there's this like friction. And as a result, it's nothing gets done because no one wants to take necessary responsibility for it. And that is changing. And that is once again why such a need for App Omni, because anyone can just learn to use the product very easily, the App Omni product, and become like a SaaS security expert, because my team is doing that net novel research for you. Like we're your SaaS security experts. If you've got Salesforce, ServiceNow, NetSuite, whatever it might be, we know where the risks are. We're going to productize it, build in those scans. So when you log in, you instantly see like, okay, high, critical, medium, click into the finding, review it, and you get your resolution guidance that we provide. And all of a sudden, you've just got rid of like 5 potential critical issues, without not necessarily needing to fully understand the technicalities of that. So in that way, it's extremely powerful because we're enabling anyone to become a SaaS security expert internally in the organization.
Yeah, that is, it's really fascinating. You know, you bring up a really good point. So I have, the CCSP certification, CCSK, right? Specifically talks about the cloud. And so, SaaS falls into there, right? And when you're reviewing the material, they hardly even talk about misconfiguration within SaaS apps. I mean, like they touch on it like it's a line item, it's a bullet point, right? But they don't tell you, hey, you need to really focus on this and pay attention to it, because you can open yourself up to, risks that you're not, accounting for, that you don't even know are there. And that's still a very big misconception with SaaS apps overall, I'm finding, which, it took us like what, 5 years, 5+ years to get over that misconception with the cloud.
Yeah.
Like there was a huge misconception to think just throw it in the cloud secures it, right? I mean, AWS would have to put out blog posts and videos and all that sort of stuff just to educate their customers that, hey, you still have security stuff that you have to do. And if you don't do it, this bucket's going to be public, right? Like, I mean, they used to have a public first, bucket configuration where like you would have to specifically say, make this private. Now they switched it, of course, but it's really interesting because SaaS is a part of the cloud, right? It's bigger in the cloud than ever before, than any other area of the cloud. Thinking about like infrastructure and PaaS as PaaS, right? Like SaaS is probably the biggest part of the cloud now, and people are forgetting that they have to still do that security configurations within their SaaS app, you know, it's, it's
Yeah,
interesting.
it's funny you mentioned the public default first, right? Because it classes the exact same thing. I've seen all of these big, powerful SaaS applications evolve with security over time, largely as a result of research. And it's situations like, oh, when you create an access control, it's blank by default, like nothing gets added to it. Or if you write some custom code on top of the platform, if you don't specify explicitly that it should run in like user mode, it will run in system mode. So effectively, anyone executing the code is running a system. It's like an instant privilege escalation. And these are interesting developments because it's almost like we're not just educating like the security community and the customers, but also the vendors in a sense, and helping them improve their product. It's not just the customers that we're focusing on at AppOmni, it is also improving the product for everyone. Yes, you could say, but it's so lucrative if these findings or these potential misconfigurations are never hardened right out of the box. It's lucrative for you because you have a product and you're just going to keep finding criticals and everyone's going to want to buy you. But at the end of the day, that just doesn't help anyone. It isn't the best feeling hooking up like an M365 or a Salesforce instance. And I now have to sit through multiple errors to walk through like 100 findings with the customer. It's so overwhelming for them. Right. So yeah, I just want to get to a place in which we can assist the vendors while also assisting our customers in like the most frictionless way possible.
Yeah, that's probably, you know, the only path forward. Like we need these vendors to kind of be to have their own. I mean, they probably do. I would certainly assume that they have their own like security research team, right? But you know, we need these vendors to kind of make it dummy proof, you know, for idiots, you know, like me that are not developers that, you know, may still be tasked with like application security. Like when I'm tasked with it, I'm immediately looking for like tools and shortcuts and, you know, what tells me the most amount of information most accurately and things like that. You know, when when you're, you know, pen testing a SaaS app, do you have to be a developer? Like, do you have to have that skill set? And I ask because previously you mentioned how, you know, you don't like functions. Functions are confusing, you know, as they are
Probably.
for me. Like functions are super confusing for me. That's where my Python education like ends every single time I try to go down it, right? Is like as soon as I hit functions, I get the basic level of functions and then they like step it up to the advanced stuff. And I'm just like, yeah, I'm done. Like, I don't want to look at
Yeah.
this.
Yeah. Yeah. The functional programming. I'm never going to return to that. Whatsoever. Haskell is a no for me. I mean, you don't have to have that knowledge. You don't have to be able to write code. There's a lot of security researchers, and we're talking like de facto like bug hunters or individuals who just perform code auditing of open source projects that can't necessarily write the code, but they can understand it and read it. And depending on the language that the code's written in, that can be easy or it can be hard, right? It's very easy to read a Python script in comparison to like assembly language, right? And so while you don't necessarily need to be able to write it, for some types of issues, it can be very useful to be able to at least understand what's going on. And typically that's usually JavaScript, is what I find on a lot of these powerful platforms, which it's not awful. Okay? It's not the worst thing to have to read. But that's just like a small subset, of potential risk, with the whole like custom development side of things. So yeah, you don't need to necessarily come into SaaS security having like all of this expert knowledge of programming languages. One of the benefits is if you're looking for things like exploitable configurations, then like you don't necessarily need to know about like SQL injection. You don't necessarily need to know about like XML external entity attacks. Like that's also a benefit, right? So yeah, it takes a while to get used to. A lot of the individuals who come into the SaaS security space from a more of a traditional background in like pen testing do struggle quite a lot because it's a shift in mindset. So it's not just like necessarily the skill set we're talking about, but it's also the mindset. I have to explain to people, like, I'm not necessarily looking for 0 days here, right? I'm looking for things that look suspicious, that look dangerous, and seeing, okay, how can this be exploited? And sometimes it can't, right? And that's just the case. But oftentimes it can. So yeah, it's just a couple, just some food for thought for anyone who wants to kind of get into the space. I don't want to put anyone off, but it takes a while to wrap your head around it for sure.
Yeah, it's interesting that you put it like that. Uh, I can find I find myself, with myself at least, starting from scratch and coding, it's really difficult for me. Like just starting from scratch and trying to like piece it all together, right? Like that's really difficult. But I can read it really well, right? So I understand what's going on when I, read a Python script or JavaScript, whatever it is. Like I typically understand it pretty well. And so now I'm actually like, I'll use, AI or, Grok, right, to write me the script, and then I plug in everything that I need and, adjust it to how it'll work and whatnot, right? As I'm doing, right? Like you're learning the different techniques and things like that when you're reading through it. You're learning how it operates, but it's really helpful, to hear like, hey, you don't have to be a developer to get into the AppSec space. And I think that that's probably like the biggest hurdle that anyone, looking at security and saying, where do I want to focus my time? That's probably like the biggest hurdle for AppSec overall is people just saying, well, I don't want to be a developer. And application, that sounds like developer, so why would I not have to be a developer to secure it,
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. And, back when I was a security engineer, I didn't do any development whatsoever. And even up on me today, any of the development that I do is just a new area for me that I wanted to explore. Like I enjoy productizing like my own findings because I like seeing that end to end, like from finding the issue to building the scan and then seeing it benefit our customers in that sense. But I really don't have to be doing that. I could be, my role is purely security research, to be honest with you. And also, you made a good point. I mean, you could just throw these code snippets from these scripts that the vendors are putting on customer instances or customer developed code, throw them to ChatGPT, right? And you'll hopefully get some coherent explanation for it. And in that sense, you'll both learn how to better read it and also better understand it. So it's a good point.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. Well, Aaron, I'm very mindful, of the time that I that I set for podcasts, because I know everyone in this industry is so busy. But, before I let you go, for one, this was a fantastic conversation. I absolutely want to have you back on, and, we'll connect. We'll, maybe collaborate on a couple things, right? But, it was a very fascinating conversation. Really enjoyed having you on.
Thank you so much. And it's honestly fantastic to be on. I thoroughly enjoyed it. And it's fantastic kind of to learn about yourself and your background too.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. Well, before I let you go, how about you tell my audience, where they could find you if they wanted to, reach out and connect, or maybe just see what you're posting out there, and where do they find App Omni, and maybe a little bit about your research.
Yeah. So, I mean, to start from more of a kind of a personal perspective, my Twitter is conspiracy proof, all one word. I made it when I was like 16. Don't judge me. Uh, conspiracy proof on Twitter or X, as it's now called. You can find me on LinkedIn, Aaron Costello. I'm very, very active there as well. So shoot me a message on either platform. I do have my own personal blog that's enumerated.ie, where I will more so now backlink to the App Omni blog, but my original research is present there. So there's a couple articles that are potentially too spicy, right, to put on the work website. But the biggest chunk of my research is on the appomni.com website. So we've got a section of our blog called App Omni Labs, and that's where you'll really find a lot of my stuff. So you got white papers, blog posts, tons of different types of content that hopefully are really useful to enjoy.
Awesome. Well, thanks again, Aaron, for coming on, and, everyone listening, go ahead and check out, Aaron's posts, the resources that he mentioned, and check out App Omni. All right. Well, thanks everyone. Hope you
Thanks for
enjoyed
the
this episode.